And this is our weekly sub-series between two consultants. I'm JJWalsh here in Hiroshima, Japan.
Hi, and I'm Tove Kinooka in Yokohama, just outside Tokyo.
And every week we try to share new ideas or articles or news stories or events. And then at the end of the broadcast, we usually give a book recommendation, something that we've been reading. Kind of connected to sustainability in terms of borderless, but most of our content is focused on Japan. Wouldn't you say, Tova?
Yeah, I think so. That's where we are. That's our world at the moment, isn't it? Can't go anywhere else.
Absolutely. Tova, do you want to start? You had an interesting article about chocolate, everybody's favorite, but there is like a darker side to think about, right?
There is a darker side, and we're not talking about dark chocolate. So for me, I'm a lifelong chocoholic, as anyone who knows me knows. But and at the moment, we're seeing it everywhere, right? We've got Valentine's Day coming up. The shops are full of it. Easter will be following on after that. Maybe not so big here, but certainly big elsewhere. And it's a time when the chocolate makers sell an awful lot of chocolate. But as you can see from the title there, it's incredibly damaging to the environment. And actually, when you look at the footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions of chocolate compared to other categories of food, it comes just after red meat. It's number 5 on a list of sort of widely eaten food categories, which is really quite shocking. And I think a lot of people perhaps don't realize. If you look at why that is, chocolate, the cocoa beans, the pods are grown usually in monocrops. So there's a lot of connection with deforestation, where large areas of rainforest, for example, are cleared to grow the chocolate crops. That also leads to loss of biodiversity. It degrades the soil, so you get sort of having to use more and more fertilizers. You then get chemical pollution. There's the whole environmental impact side of it. Plus, of course, chocolate often generally includes milk, sugar, cane sugar, palm oil as well. So you've got the knock-on effects from those ingredients as well. So it's pretty bad stuff. And the difficulty is a lot of chocolate that the big chocolate makers use comes from, mainly sort of Western Africa or certain parts of South America, around Brazil, Ecuador, etc. And they're often produced by smallholders, okay? But then they come to the chocolate producer through at least one sort of middleman, sometimes several layers. So it's very, very hard to trace really where has this chocolate come from? Where did your cocoa beans originate? And so it's very hard to know, even when companies are trying really, really hard, it's very difficult to know really can you guarantee this has been produced ethically? Can you guarantee that it's not being produced on cleared areas of virgin rainforest land and so on? It's really difficult to trace that. And then of course you've got the whole child labor side as well. Slavery, child labor is a huge issue in chocolate production, as it is in coffee, possibly worse in chocolate. There's less accountability and traceability still in the chocolate industry. So there's a whole range of terrifying things that many people often don't realize. And you might see a sign saying sort of organic or fair trade, but it's very difficult to really verify that, particularly with the bigger chocolate makers. So you're showing here People Tree. So this is one that is a bean to bar, I believe, and tries a lot harder to is able to trace it right back to where the beans come from. So if you are buying chocolate for Valentine's Day or Easter, or just generally, for me, it's a once a week habit. I try and keep it to that. Then you really ought to be looking for this bean to bar, because then you can guarantee that it has come from a certified source. So lots to think about there. And we have power as consumers. We really hold the power, and the companies that produce it that at the moment aren't making enough effort to trace down through are not going to change unless we as consumers change our habits. So it's food for thought in many ways.
Yeah. It's a great thing to be a little bit more aware of when you're shopping and realize that there are better options, such as People Tree. They
Yeah.
make fantastic chocolate. I'm so lucky it's in my local like macrobiotic organic section of my supermarket now.
Yeah,
And
it's everywhere at the moment.
I did a back and forth interview with Sophia Minnie, who started People Tree
Oh, wonderful.
years ago, like over 10 years ago. And one of the things that she said is that she was hoping that her company wouldn't be needed, that a fair trade for clothing or chocolate would just be normal and everybody would be doing it. There would be no reason to keep going. Well, that has not been the case. So I really respect how long she's been at it in Japan and the UK. And recently, they also have been starting to offer vegan chocolate, which is very rare in Japan. So not only you have the fair trade, but also you have the plant-based chocolate, which is very hard to find usually. So they're using like coconut milk or cashew nuts instead of the animal dairy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to have a huge, positive impact on obviously the overall carbon footprint of the product. So if you look for vegan chocolate, and sometimes it tastes a little different, and it's about sort of learning to enjoy that taste. Certainly, it took me a little while to find one. The coconut oil ones I wasn't so keen on, but ones like you say made with cashew or soy, I find it sort of closer to maybe what I'm used to and what I really like. So experiment a bit, but there are more and more options coming out now, which is really great to see. And one other, still on the subject of chocolate, if I may, there's one other company I'd really like to highlight on a much more local level. So a few weeks back or a few months back now, I was in Yokohama, my local town, and came across a small company called ChocoLabo. And I was curious. It was a new chocolate shop. Of course, I had to go in and have a look. And I was lucky enough that day, the founder of the company just happened to be in the shop, approached me and started chatting in English, which was a huge surprise. And it turns out that it's a very small sort of artisan chocolate maker just based in the Kanagawa area at the moment, but beginning to sell their products. They've got them online, as you can see here, but also in some of the larger department stores and stuff. And this whole company started when the founder's son, who is disabled, was unable to find a decent job when he finished school. And the founder at the time was working in banking, was very frustrated, and could see that his son had a lot of value to offer, but just wasn't being given the opportunity to do decent work. He was very frustrated like this, so he set up this chocolate company. And it's a social business. Most of the people they employ have some kind of physical or mental disabilities, but they are employed in decent work. They're paid a fair wage, and they're incredibly creative. And they produce this wonderful chocolate. All the packaging is designed by them. They're also very good on the environmental side of being careful about their packaging, minimal plastic, and so on. And they also source their beans ethically and are very careful to find out where those come from and how they're produced. So the whole concept of the company is just wonderful. And I was really, fortunate to just find out that backstory behind it when I went in there. So that's definitely my favorite chocolate brand at the moment, ChocoLabo. They have wonderful single origin chocolate from, say, Tanzania, Vietnam, and so on. So would highly recommend having a look at their online store if you're looking for something different that does good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. I also have a local recommendation. Hiroshima has a wonderful vegan chocolate and direct trade, very ethical, like direct for cashew nuts, for the cocoa beans, for a lot of the products that they import. They have a direct trade agreement with the local communities that grow it. And it's called USHIO chocolate. And there's a wide range of interesting and really delicious flavors. And a lot of women work at this business. And they They have such a creative design. So their
Oh,
cashew nuts come from Vietnam. They make sure to design their products with paper, and all the designs are designed by women. And they hire a lot of women as part of their team. So there's a lot of gender empowerment involved with the business as well. So, yeah, wonderful company.
fantastic. I'm making a note of that. We'll be having a look.
Yeah, great. So moving on, well, let's continue on the gender
Mhm.
equity theme, because I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with Dr. Wes Robertson, and his specialty is looking at the Japanese written script and how the diverse use of kanji, hiragana, and katakana in different ways over the years can portray differences that you might not realize, depending on representing a character in a manga story as flamboyant, or people who are non-binary might create certain kinds of writing to show that they're not they're a part of a special group as a groupism. There were so many interesting takeaways, and he was looking a lot at how the three types of Japanese are often used
Mhm.
in the same way. And if you just used katakana, or if you just used hiragana, or just kanji, you would have a very different impression than when you use it in a balanced way. And I love this focus of how the SDGs number 5 for gender has
Mhm.
been done, because the whole idea of using the katakana gender has really created kind of a movement towards thinking about people who are non-binary, not just women and
Yeah.
men, but
Mhm.
gender in a wider sense. It's not just about women empowerment. It's much bigger and wider
Right.
conversation, like the SDG gender equity is was originally
Mm.
intended. But this was kind of a new word used in Japanese, and use of gender in katakana, I think, has been a very positive movement, instead of
Yeah.
using maybe a kanji version. So that was
Yeah.
really interesting.
That is interesting, isn't it? Because I know, you know, I've had discussions with my husband over the years over which word or kanji, I feel comfortable with him using, for me when he's referring to me as his wife, because there are different ways to write it in Japanese, different ways to say it, and some of them, when you look at the meaning, I'm really not very comfortable. For example, kanai, meaning sort of her in the house, who stays in the house. And when you look at the meaning of the actual kanji like that, it can be used in a very sort of with good intentions, say, or certainly with no negative intentions. But when you look at the meaning and where that's come from, I'm really not comfortable with that, being referred to as kanai. So it's really interesting to hear these stories behind the words, and how using different kanji, or using hiragana or katakana instead, can actually imply a very, very different meaning, and perhaps much more inclusive and open. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and there were also connections to like marketing, and how a company can clearly communicate, and
Mm.
how the importance of testing how you want to communicate, right? Like, so
Yeah.
there's some companies in Japan, for example, he gave the example of Starbucks. And Starbucks, instead of using on one of their posters, kohi in
Mhm.
katakana, they chose to use the kanji that you often see for coffee.
Okay.
And you see it in Japan at like higher quality,
Yeah.
like small
Mhm.
artisan shops or something, right?
Yeah.
And he heard from some Japanese people that they didn't like that. They didn't like that Starbucks was using that kanji. They felt it was a bit like putting on airs, a little bit too pompous.
Mm,
So
right.
checking how your audience is perceiving
Mm.
these choices that you're making and how you're communicating is also a very interesting aspect of that, right?
Very much so. I mean, you're just reminding me now that last year we worked on a very big project with a Japanese coffee company, and we were working with the Japan operations, the headquarters here, but also their European operations, which are actually bigger in terms of volume of trade. And the sustainability report, we were doing the materiality process for them, finding out what are their key issues, what do they need to focus on, then moving into ambition setting. And at the end of each phase, we had to present the report in Japanese to the family, the owners of this family company. And the translation was so hard because you couldn't just do it literally. The reports were written in English to begin with. And for example, simple things like the word sustainability, there is a word in Japanese. You can use jizoku kanose. There's kanji for it. But the Japanese headquarters team were not comfortable with that and said, no, we want to use katakana sustainability because we feel that sort of better encompasses what we're trying to get across here. Jizoku kanose perhaps wouldn't be understood widely enough by people who don't have a sustainability background. So, we want to go with the katakana.
We talked about that. We talked about that at the end.
Right.
And I one of his ways to judge how the audience is perceiving these choices that companies are making as they launch a new brand, for example, he gave an example of chairs. How if you search Google Images for kanji or katakana or hiragana for the word chair in Japanese, you have very different representations. So I did the same thing for sustainability. You search for sustainability in kanji, only get official SDG or government information. You search in katakana, you get a much more diverse group of grassroots organizations, businesses, as well as government. So then I was like, okay, so that's what I want to use, right? So that was so interesting that you had that same discussion with someone you were working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really made us rethink, how we message to, externally as well about what we're doing. So we've shifted to using the katakana sustainability rather than the kanji now, because that seems to be sort of, it gets across a clearer understanding of what we do. So really.
But another interesting kind of takeaway is he was saying, like I showed that if I do sustainability in hiragana, I get like almost no hits.
No.
And of anything that I would want to target. But he said, in the way the internet works, if you do have something unique and you are trying to communicate in a different way than has been the norm, having a different script might not be a bad idea, right? Yeah,
right.
so that's interesting in terms of
Yes,
SEO or the meta tags or how the internet picks up, how Google will rank your information. So that gave me a good feeling about rebranding for Seek Sustainable Japan this year, that is a really unique hashtag.
Yeah.
And I have built up Seeking Sustainability Live since 2020. And so it was a big decision to change.
Right.
But
Yes, it is.
I feel like Seek Sustainable Japan is more concise and close to what I'm trying to get across, right?
Yeah.
So always, like anything with sustainability, right, Tova? Always reevaluating where you are, how you could get better, right?
Absolutely. And really just checking in with how is that messaging being received. I mean, again, that's such a core part of our work when we're working with, say the C-suite of the company to look at how they're messaging their sustainability strategy internally as well as externally. So we don't deal so much with the external messaging. We've got partners who can do that very effectively. But if the top of the company is talking about one thing, is that really being understood throughout the company? Do people really know what this means for them and their particular function and role within the organization? So I think there's often not enough thought put into that. And it's just assumed that, okay, we use this word, that's a standard word, everybody will understand this. But it can mean different things to different people unless you're really checking in with how is this being received? Is that the way that we want it to come across? Or do we need to shift our messaging a little to really connect with people? Things can fall flat. So it's important to really sort of dig into that, I think.
Absolutely. And that ties into my next thing that I wanted to talk about a talk I did last week with Alex K.T. Martin about In Search of Japan's Lost Wolves. And there is a discussion in one of his chapters with some local conservationists who want to bring back the wolf and try it, maybe on an island. Because basically the wolves are extinct, they don't exist anymore, but they had a really important role in terms of balancing the herbivores. Now we
Yes.
have way too many deer and inushisi, wild boar, and monkeys, which have taken over and causing havoc for any farmer trying to grow anything in the country area. But the wolves were always so good at keeping these animals in balance, right? So there's good argument to bring it back, but a knee-jerk reaction by a lot of communities is not in our community. I don't want to be like stalked by wolves as I walk through forest, which used to happen. But what he was saying is historically, wolves never attacked people. They might stalk you. They might drink the urine that was stored outside the houses for fertilizer. So then the idea that wolves like salt came up. There are a lot of really interesting folklore connections too. But the whole idea of you have to educate a community, you have to have clear communication between all the stakeholders before you decide something like this, like reintroducing a new animal or something. And I think that's similar for businesses, right? Like when a business changes to a more sustainable strategy, you have to explain to the consumer why this is good for them and why they should deal with the hassle of changing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we were saying, internally as well for the employees, if you're asking people to change their behaviors and you're suddenly putting KPIs on them that are related to sustainability, they need to understand why. Why is this important? How does it connect to me in my role in finance or in sales or in marketing or in, whatever part of the company I'm working in? Because if you're just pushing change down from the top and saying to people, well, now we'll do it this way, people tend to push back against change. So unless they really understand why and can see the benefits clearly, understand why this is necessary. It's all about education and dialogue and keeping that communication two-way and consistent and constant.
Yeah, absolutely. Another like connected discussion I had, which is now in podcast from today, I talked with a woman, now Fukuoka, who talked about her original inspiration to move out to the rural countryside from years ago when she visited Tahiti. And she was talking to people from her trip with Peace Boat and talking with people about nuclear power and radiation sickness. And she learned so much from the local people and learned about their indigenous culture philosophy about if you take from nature, you have to give back to nature. And so she had this in her mind for years. And so this was kind of her reason behind moving to the countryside in Hiroshima and starting organic farming and starting seminars where they invite people to show them it's possible to do natural farming without pesticides or artificial fertilizers. And this all came from maybe 15 years ago when she was in Tahiti. So all of these interactions, all of this knowledge, all of these seed planting that people are doing as educators, as consultants, as even community activists, it all pays off eventually, I think.
Absolutely. And you've touched on another really key point there, I think, which is role models. Having sort of demonstrated success cases of what is possible is also incredibly important. So she'd seen, in Tahiti how things were working there. And now, if she's bringing people to the farm, that they can understand, there is another way. It doesn't have to be the way we've been doing it for the last 30, 40 years, the way we've all grown used to. The same with, consumer behaviors. We've all got very used to a very convenient, easy lifestyle, to having certain things whenever we want them and not thinking about seasonality and stuff like that. So I think, having role models to show this is possible. There is another way of doing things and you can succeed, and it's not actually that hard. is incredibly important, whether we're talking about products or farming processes, or again in the company in terms of leadership, inclusivity and things like that. Unless you've got people modeling that behavior, it's very hard for people to understand what it is and what it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It is time for our book recommendations. Tova, do you want to start? Bushido Capitalism.
Well, talking of role models, I think the author of this book, so Sakurada Kengo-san, who is the president and CEO of Sompo Holdings Japan, which is a huge sort of elderly care insurance provider as well, he's an incredible role model. So I picked up this book at Heathrow Airport in London last year, coming back from visiting my mother, and read it cover to cover on the plane. Fascinating book. So I love the fact, if you look at the subtitle here, The Code to Redefine Business for a Sustainable Future. And looking at Bushido principles and values as a starting point for rethinking capitalism, rethinking how we run our businesses and how we interact between businesses and societies and so on. It was a really interesting read, and some of the things he highlighted there I think are very, very important for companies to move towards. So collaboration over competition was something he was really sort of looking at and illustrating how he's been doing that at Sompo, both within the organization, but also between organizations, competitors in the same industry, and so on. Celebrating value and achievements anywhere, so smaller things, really making sure people are aware of what's happening and feeling appreciated and valued, connected to the company. And he was talking about how COVID-19 has given companies a chance to press the reset button. I know there's been a lot of discussion on this in the media, but to really recalibrate the systems. It doesn't have to be a wholesale, change of throw out everything we've done before, but a chance just to pause and say, okay, how can we recalibrate this so that the balance is better? As you've spoken about before, that balance between people, profit, and planet. About sort of really looking very carefully at that. And I really like the fact that, he says, okay, Bushido has, there are plenty of flaws as well. This was the code for the samurai, the warriors of past, and that there were many things which are no longer relevant to modern life. However, there are a lot of deeply held values, things there, sort of equality, treating people equally, trust, and so on, that are actually very, very valuable. And they're here in Japan. They are here. They're deeply rooted in Japanese psyche, in culture, and so on. So I think when we're talking about sustainability and when in the work we do with organizations, there's often this feeling that, okay, this is coming from outside. This is being pushed on us from the UN or, from sort of multinational governments pressuring other countries to up their game, to do things differently, and so on. But it's not, it is here. It is deeply in there. Perhaps some of these things have been lost over the years in the rush sort of post-war to rebuild, and that was very important. Japan had to rebuild, but I think a lot of those incredible strong values that think about community, that think about collaboration, have been pushed down, but they're not lost. They are still there. It's about rediscovering those and rediscovering how we can apply them in a modern context to actually, think very long term and build a more sustainable future, as he says in the book there. So would highly recommend reading this one. A really, really fascinating book and very relevant.
Wow. That looks amazing. I'm going to have to find that. I have two book recommendations, and both of them are academic. So you might want to ask your library to order it for you, or your university. The first was, we talked about Dr. Wes Robertson. He wrote Scripting Japan, about a variation in how Japanese is written and the nuances that are perceived by the reader. And another is, it looks really scary, Circulating Fear.
Ooh.
Now, this is Dr. Leslie Nielsen, and she is a professor at Meiji University, and she's joining the talk show this week, Thursday. to talk about this. But this is just a fascinating book, and also a little bit pricey. Ask your library to buy it. It's a research book. It's based on her PhD and master's research into Japanese horror, and how Japanese horror actually has so many connections back to social equity issues and talking about gender. So it should be a really interesting discussion, but also a very interesting book. I've been going through it.
Wow, look forward to hearing that talk about those connections. That sounds very, very
Yeah, because I'm not a horror person, but
likewise.
it is so popular around the world, right? Japanese
Mm.
horror is
Yeah.
like an internationally well-known thing that a lot of American films are based on Japanese films, and
Yes. Yeah.
it's incredible.
Huh. There you go.
Also,
Learn
just
something new every day.
just an announcement. Tomorrow morning, I'm talking with Dorothy Eishin Takatsu, who is a Buddhist monk in Nagano who started Horakuan, which is a Zen retreat center. And I'll be talking with her tomorrow. And then Thursday about horror. And then Saturday morning, talking like a preview on the Minka Summit. So there is Minka Akiya Remodel Old Houses conference 3-day event happening in April. I'm talking with 2 of the organizers on Saturday morning, so join us if you're free.
Fantastic.
And I think that's it for us today. Tove, thank you so much once again. Great discussion.
Thank you.
And everyone, thanks for joining, and join us again next week for 30-minute short takes.
Great.
Have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.